Hello and welcome. It's Wednesday, June 3rd. It is World Bicycle Day. My name is Daniel Hall. I'm the Executive Director of London Cycle Link. We are helping more Londoners ride more often, and we're excited to have the series to envision a better future, a better normal. And we got a special guest today that we're really keen to bring on and pick her brain about all the different ways that bikes can be part of the solution. Before we do that, though, we have some announcements, so I'll pass it to my co-host, Luis. Luis, welcome.
Thanks, Dan. And like Dan said, today is World Bicycle Day, June 3rd, and I think was established in 2018. So it's a long-standing tradition that was established by the United Nations. So if you want to participate, make sure you ride your bike today and post on social media. You can use the hashtag World Bicycle Day or World Bicycle Day 2020. There are a few variations on the theme. If you want to know a little bit more about that, you can check their website and why they consider the bike, they give such importance to bike that it even deserves his own World Day. And this is the sixth episode in our webcast. Well, if you're losing track, we do have, we do have all the episodes here on our website, so make sure you check them out. And for other information regarding our emergency response and recovery and how bikes fit into this into this crisis and how it can be part of the solution, we have a few more news and articles in our website as well. We were going to have virtual town hall to talk about exactly about this green recovery, and we're looking forward to that to see what our local, provincial, and federal representatives would say about biking when it comes to a green recovery. But we just learned that this will be, it was postponed, but I think it's still a very relevant conversation. So if you didn't sign up for that yet, here's the link, and keep an eye to see when is the new date that is coming up. Dan, back to you.
Thanks, Luis. Before I introduce our special guest today, I'd like to acknowledge that not only are we in a pandemic, but we also are in a world in North America where the events of Minneapolis and just the activities that are ongoing, even in our city, even though that maybe there's not the same public events that are taking place, we want to acknowledge the efforts in London to quell racism, to create a society and a city that everyone has an equal right to the city and to opportunities. And we see our role as bike advocates as assisting in that. So I just want to acknowledge that before we move on. And to change gears a little bit, although Nancy will have a lot to say about this as well, I want to invite our special guest. Nancy Smith-Lee is the director of the Center for Active Transportation. She's been advocating for and researching about cycling for decades. She's kind of a cycling advocate, rock star, if you will, and we're so excited to have her on. In 2018, she was featured as one of the 8 top women change makers in Toronto, working hard to make the city a better place. And we're so excited to be able to have her on and share her wisdom and experience with us. So thank you for joining us, Nancy.
Hey, thanks for having me. And thanks so much for that, for prefacing today with your remarks, Daniel. I also just want to acknowledge my privilege in these really tumultuous times to have a safe place to live that allows me to shelter in place with access to the outdoors and a walkable and bikeable part of my city. You know, as a woman and a cyclist, I'm vulnerable, but the reality is that because of my privilege as a white person, I can do most things that I want to do without thinking twice about my safety. So I think it's so important to have this into the conversation that our public streets and spaces should be, you know, like indiscriminately safe for everyone. So thank you for prefacing today with your remarks, Daniel.
Well, thank you for that, Nancy, too. I have been reflecting on that and how grateful I am for some of those privileges in my life, and want to make sure that everyone has that opportunity too. So thank you. And we want to start with that why question. This has been your life's work. I don't want to maybe limit. You probably have lots of life's works in other avenues, but you've done a lot for cycling, and it's your biography reads like I don't know. I am awed by how much you've done and worked at. And so I want to just ask the first question is why? Why have you devoted your life to this? Why is cycling so important in cities?
Yeah, and thanks for calling it my life's work rather than my obsession, which it's kind of is. And it's, you know, as like a lot of us in this kind of work, we just find ourselves in this place kind of accidentally, and mine is no exception. You know, it was actually a traffic collision that that kind of launched me into the world of advocacy. And that was over, as you mentioned, over 25 years ago. So, but yeah, it's really hard to kind of underestimate the power of the bicycle. And I know that you folks know that, and probably the people listening as well. I mean, it's such a simple machine, but it's just so powerful. And, you know, just all of the things about it. It makes us healthy, it makes us active, it cleans the air, it's, you know, it's quiet, it's cheap, it's efficient. And it's the most practical and convenient way to get around. So those are all like the reasons that about it that keep me that have kept me going for the past 25 years. But yeah, there's definitely that kind of the social justice aspect to it that has always been very important for me, and it's really what launched me into this to this work, and it's also to some extent what keeps me going. But one of the things that when I started doing this work in cycling, it was a long time ago, and I was a researcher and was seeing that there was no kind of evidence base around cycling. At the time, there was, I think, the only person in North America who was writing about this was John Pucher, who's like an amazing rock star in the US, who's now retired. But so that was, you know, I wanted to both kind of marry my passion around cycling with my research focus. And so that's what actually got me started. And part of this, and I did my master's on urban cycling safety back in 2001. So yeah, so I think that's just I mean, there's so much the work that you folks are doing in London and other advocates are doing across the country is so critically important, that kind of, you know, on the ground work. But for the most part, we do on the ground work as well. We do some community bike hub work, but for the most part, our work is really very much has a research bent to it. And so yeah, I'm happy to talk to you about some of what we've found in terms of the impact on the economic impact of cycling.
Maybe we'll jump right there then, because we titled this episode Bikeconomics. And just as you say that, one of the things that we on the ground advocates always sort of need is the good data, the good research. So we're ecstatic about the Center for Active Transportation and the work that you do to provide some of the tools that we can use to advocate with. So what does the evidence say about bikes and business, or bikes and the economy?
So, in a nutshell, I mean, we've been doing this work for over a decade, so what we've found in a nutshell is that where there are main streets in urban centers, that there's this contested space around the curb lane, and that in particular the on-street parking is something that we found. And when I was doing advocacy work, and I'm sure you come up against it too, is that merchants are very concerned about losing that space for a bike lane. Did I lose you guys? You're there?
Sorry, we just wanted to give you the whole screen.
Okay, but I couldn't see you. That's fine, sure. So that space is really contested, And so that was something that we wanted to find out was, because when in public meetings, we would hear from merchants saying, this is going to put us out of business. Cyclists don't come to my store. And so we really wanted to find out what was the evidence around that. And so we've been digging into that question over the past 10 years or so. Our first report was published in 2009, and then a subsequent one in 2010. And then we did a larger study that was released in 2017. And so in that case, and all of these have been focused on Bloor Street in downtown Toronto. But we've done a lot of work to look and to see what else is happening in other cities, and have done a whole bunch of we have had an amazing research team that have done some great work on the lit review. But basically what we found is that in terms of who's coming to those businesses, both in downtown Toronto, but even when we did a study looking a little bit further out, the vast majority of people are not driving. And that was really something that was surprising to us in our first study. It's not as surprising to us anymore. But I think what we found, and this has consistently been found in the research as well, is that merchants really overestimate the number of people who are coming to their store by car. And in the case of Bloor Street in the annex, we found that only 10% of people were driving to shop or to access services on Bloor Street. And so I think that was really important. Both, each time we've done this study, we found kind of similar results and have seen that in others as well. But I think that that first study that we put out was really important to kind of address that conception that many people have, including merchants, that most people are driving to their store. And so that was a really important finding. So the other thing that we were interested in was, what would that look like in terms of the, if we made that change to the street environment in terms of putting in a bike lane, what would the result be? And so as I mentioned, our last study, we finally had the opportunity to do a case control pre-post study because there was a pilot bike lane being proposed for Bloor Street. And so we went in and collected data before, and then we collected data at two other points after the bike lane was put in to find out if people's travel patterns had changed. The city did a whole host of studies as well around safety and around collisions and all sorts of things. So, but ours was really focused on the economic impact. And so yeah, we used we surveyed both. We surveyed over 3,000 people on the street, and we surveyed all of the ground level merchants. And we also used a control site in another part of town to kind of get a sense of how things were different in the two areas. And it was so what we found was that people who are walking and cycling and taking transit are coming more often, and they're spending more money than people who are driving in that location. And so that was a really important finding. We also found that the vacancy rates remained pretty stable. And the city also did a study looking at the Moneris credit card transaction data and found that the transactions were fairly similar if you compare them to the other parts of the city. So yeah, I think those are the main things that we found in the study, which was obviously pre-pandemic. So it's hard to know, what this is going to look like post-pandemic, but I think it's been pretty clear to us that the role of people walking and cycling to these local businesses is really, it can't be overstated, that that's people like to live in walkable, cyclable places. They want to hang out there and they want to shop there. And so obviously this isn't like about big box locations or suburban locations. This is really about those kind of like main streets. So, and in our case, it was focused on Bloor Street, but there's been a lot of other studies, mostly in the US, that have found really similar kind of results.
One of the pushbacks that we got when we were advocating for, using this research and saying, look, like bikes are good for business, good for merchants, because here's the evidence in Toronto, here's the evidence in New York City and Portland. One of the pushbacks we got was, oh, that's, those are big cities with a developed biking culture. What about mid-sized cities? Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so I wanted to get my notes on that because I actually reached out to, we had we had a paper that was published in the Journal of American Planning, JAPA, and our primary author on that paper, Daniel Arancibia, did a lot of work on the lit review. So it was when I knew that this was a question that you're obviously interested in, I reached out to him to see what he had found, and it was interesting. He said that so the North American research on this topic is focused on larger cities, as you know, although Portland and Seattle are arguably not super large cities, certainly not by global standards, but because they're the places where there's the most competition for that curb space that I was talking about. And he said they're also the places that are most unlike Dutch cities, which tend to be on the smaller side and where we know cycling infrastructure works really well. So I think that was part of that's part of the reason that this research is being done in large cities in North America. Some of the pushback that we get in terms of wanting to have this kind of infrastructure in a large city like Toronto is, well, we're not a small city. Like, this is a big city. We can't be like messing around with bikes we need to be moving traffic, right? So, I think we definitely have a lot of evidence from Dutch cities and from Northern European cities about how well bike infrastructure works in terms of that connection with the economy. And one of the studies that we looked at, though, was in Davis, California, and they actually did a study that looked at the impact of big box on the other local businesses, and they found that the businesses that were on that main street were much less affected by the big box than other streets, and that was those kind of main streets are more walkable and cyclable places. So I think there's lots of reasons. I think there's a lot that we can point to in terms of this being really working for small cities. We've also done at TCAT, we've done a bunch of kind of best practice work where we've looked at, released a couple of publications. One, Active Transportation Beyond the Greenbelt, that looks at rural and smaller communities. And we've also released a publication called Complete Street Transformations, where we're looking at a whole bunch of communities and street projects in these different communities that of varying sizes. For the most part, those have not looked at economic impact. For most smaller municipalities, there's typically not the budget to kind of do this kind of work on the economic impact. But definitely what we have seen, like there's a number of goals that municipalities have in developing complete streets. So, one, we hope that there will be more people walking and cycling. Secondly, we hope that it's going to be safer, that we'll see, fewer collisions that are severe and have fatalities and serious injuries. And then there's these other kind of hopes that we have that are really hard to measure, that are about that larger impact, like the better air quality and better public health outcomes, reduced obesity, and improved regional environment. So there's a lot of goals that municipalities have in building complete streets that we found are really they're really difficult to measure. The work that we've done around this, it's expensive for most small municipalities. So I think that's one of the reasons that it's not being measured and the extent that it is. But I think from what we've found, we're pretty confident that it's this that bike lanes are good for no matter what size of city. And I think I'll just sorry. I was just going to end by saying on that the other thing about smaller cities is that there's typically more space to build bike infrastructure without impacting the traffic environment, if that is your desire to do so, right? So some of that those issues around the competing space aren't as much of an issue in the smaller municipalities.
Yeah, so I want to ask you, and based on your experience and you being involved in this for decades, and as you said, it's kind of an obsession. So I want to ask for your dreamer hat or your imagination hat more than your researcher hat.
Okay.
Because, like you said, we don't have uncertainty is actually the normal, right? We just thought that we could predict and plan things, and we could, like 2020 we'll do this, 2021 will be like that, and COVID came and just showed us. And again, it's not that COVID created this whole new situation; it just exposed a lot of what is already out there. But we're living in uncertainty as much as we were before. So using that, based on your experience and the things that the research that you did and the projects involved in Toronto, and now with this new reality with physical distancing and some of the initiatives that we see in Canada, in the States, and throughout the world, and we're talking about economics, trying to recover local businesses and then create more space for them, more public space, so they can have their clients, they can offer their services and products, but they can still offer the physical distancing. How do you see the role of cycling and walking, so active transportation in general, in the best case scenario moving forward? How does this play out? We have the Bloor bike lane as kind of a reference for so many other bike lane projects that we have in Canada and in North America. So if we could have more of those, how do you see that scenario in our, I guess we could say, our new normal with the physical distance measures?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hope is that it's really like it's very upsetting that it's taken a pandemic for municipalities to recognize that people walking and cycling don't have the space they need to get around. And so that's, I mean, I think that now obviously there's this other layer of needing to have this physical distance between people, but there's also just that issue that there hasn't been enough space, and we've given over too much of that space to motor vehicles, private motor vehicles for the most part. So I think that, the kind of hope is that municipalities will recognize that this was the moment where we realize that, and we're going to, this will be the new normal, as you say. But I think kind of beyond that, I think it's I see people all the time who in Toronto who are like walking in the middle of the street, mostly on residential streets. But and I think that that like the kind of general citizens have also recognized that this is, you know what, like we've just been giving over all of this space that we need, and we're taking it because we need it. And so I'm hoping that that will also, just kind of on that individual level, that people will still feel that, you know, that this is theirs to take, and that that this is the right thing to do, is to provide more space for people. So yeah, I don't know if that, did you have another part to that question that I didn't answer?
No, I think it was pretty much that.
Okay.
Like the role of cycling, and you start mentioning the maybe post physical distancing scenario, and I don't know if you want to say something else about that. Like, how do you see cycling as part of this economic recovery, and I guess I can say green economic recovery?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, for the same reasons that we know it's important to have this space, like when we're not in a pandemic. I think it's the same from before the pandemic. It will be the same after that. We just need to be giving more space, and that the more that we can make our environments walkable and cyclable, the more that will benefit our local economy. So, I mean, I think that's those things will remain true. I think one of the things that we've been trying to track what municipalities are doing across the country, and we've seen, like, you know, upwards of 30, 35 municipalities who are now doing some kind of reallocation of public space to give people walking and cycling more space, which is great. For the most part, they're not talking about that being permanent, although kind of hope that it will be. And certainly, I don't see us coming out of this anytime soon. And so I think that we're going to need to have these temporary measures in place for a while. But one of the things that I guess kind of has concerned me, and that's related to the business recovery, is this idea of extending the patios into the public space, which some municipalities are doing, which is it's a great idea. We're all for, like, helping local businesses and getting them open. Like, that's super important. But I think we just need to make sure we're applying an equity lens and an anti-racist lens to that work, and making sure that we're, you know, that, as we've seen, you know, it's been really highlighted this past week, that our streets are not safe, especially for people of color. They're not safe for people walking and cycling, but they're also not safe for people of color. And so we need to make sure that that even though we want municipalities to move quickly, we also want to make sure that we're applying an equity lens to that work, and ensuring that we're not carving off more of our public space for private use, if there's not also a sufficient space for people to move comfortably and just hang out comfortably without buying anything, if that's what they want to do. So I think all of those I just think that needs to be included in this conversation around how we're helping our local businesses get back up and running. And I think it's also another reason that we need to also be a bit cautious about some of these temporary measures that we're putting in place, because we haven't had a sufficient public consultation, and that's always really important for understanding the lived experience of people who are, you know, in the spaces that we're designing. So I think that's important to be considering as well, that we put something in place now. Let's think about it as a pilot. Let's assess it, see what works, talk to the people who are most affected, and you know, kind of adjust as we need to.
Great, thanks. I know one of the things that we often reflect on is that there's a quote that says, "Women are the indicator species of like good infrastructure for cycling." You look at Europe and where there's developed cycling infrastructure, and I think there's more women riding than men. And then in our cities in North America, often it's I don't know, 75% men, or maybe the gap is less so in cities that have more developed infrastructure. But taking an equity lens, what's your advice for cycling advocates to frame the conversation, to advocate for the right things that will serve everyone and will give public space that is open for everyone? Do you have any tips or advice for us as advocates, or even maybe for our decision makers as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the gender issue is really an interesting one. And yeah, it's true that it's like something like 70-30 in terms of cycling, who's cycling in Canada. It's even less, the numbers are a bit starker in some places. So, and you know, I've looked into that issue a lot, and so have other researchers. And it's, so what I've kind of come to at the end of the day is that if there's nothing in particularly unusual about women that we need to think about. You know, it's like sometimes there's like, oh, well, maybe we should have, you know, like special programs, and those are good. It's just that, you know, there's, I think what we've found is that women typically have more barriers to cycling than men. They tend to trip chain more than men. So they tend to take, you know, they'll take the kids to school and they'll do the shopping and they'll do whatever. So there's all these reasons that women have more barriers in front of them to take up cycling. And I think from my perspective, it's like, it's like the infrastructure is like a no-brainer. Like that's the making our streets safe is just going to result in more people cycling. And the more people are cycling, the more women will cycle. And there's just this kind of nice virtuous cycle to that. But the, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. What was I saying? Remind me.
Just about equity lens, and you're talking about women. I mean, you're using the women don't have to be designed for specifically necessarily like it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like addressing the barriers that women have and that many people have. Like many people have those barriers. So it's around safety. Safety is always like the number one. But there's other barriers as well. You know, even like if you look at like who's the kind of cultural aspect to cycling, that there's this you know, the kind of racing culture. There's the lycra culture, and some of those cultural elements can be feel a bit exclusionary for women in particular. So I think creating this kind of like more open environments in all of our institutions and all the work that we're doing is really important.
Cool, thank you. One thing you mentioned earlier was about your work in away from the core of Toronto, and like in Scarborough and some of the bike hubs there. Sometimes I feel like London has a bit of the sort of tale of two cities too. There's kind of the urban and suburban components to it. What has been successful that in Scarborough that has allowed people there to engage with the cycling culture and to start riding more in general, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've now been we're now working on our third project in suburban communities. We're working in Markham now. And when we first started doing this work in Scarborough, the team that kind of came to me on it, who had the idea, were like, we really think this is important to not just be focusing on the downtown. We need to figure out how to increase cycling outside of the core. And I came at this thinking, I don't see it. Like I really couldn't, I didn't have the imagination to see that there was a need, that I knew there was a need, but I didn't think there was a demand. And so that's been really very instructive for me in particular, because once you actually just focus on, we did some research to see where there was the most likely possibility of people wanting to cycle, where there were destinations close together, where there was already maybe a bit of infrastructure, like where we had the most the most chance of actually influencing change. And I think that's where what we need to think about. Like, cycling is so local. It's so local. It's so hyper local. And so I think all the work that we're doing, like just thinking about, we don't have to think about suburban urban divides. Like it's like, look at where you want to impact and like work in that context and work with the advocates in that area. And I've been so amazed by the response that we've had. Like, it's just like people have been like, okay, so where were you before? Like this, we've been, waiting for someone to pay attention to us. Like there was one bike shop in Scarborough. I think there still is, like, so it's just these kind of neglected areas but also where there's this high potential for influencing change. So yeah, I think it's been a real learning curve for me, because I think that there's this kind of idea of suburbs as being monolithic and uniform, and they're really not. Like they definitely as a whole are more car dependent than the urban areas, but there's pockets where there's lots of trips are being made that are under 5 kilometers, that there's some good alternate like routes that you can just help people to kind of see where those routes are and give them some support and help them with their bike repair. And just like those things can really go a long way to actually making some change in those areas. And without that, you don't get the demand for the infrastructure. You don't get, so that's this kind of like this, both things are happening, that if you don't get that demand, the councillors are like, well, I'm not hearing about it from my constituents. So you really need to get in there and make sure that people feel supported and see this as a viable option. And so, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think
answer your question.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think we've faced that in London, that we were advocating primarily, and we realized, they kept pointing to like, well, where's the demand? And so we said we have to get into the work of creating culture and creating new riders. And so we got involved in a do-it-yourself bike shop similar to the Scarborough bike hub there to do that work, to create a community hub and try and foster more cyclists and more demand ultimately for infrastructure. So it's both advocacy and community building, I think, which is what you've acknowledged. So oh, sorry. No, go for it.
I was just going to say that I think that the other piece of that is that I think we also, especially in a center like Toronto, where there's a lot of advocacy and there's a lot of bike shops and a lot of DIY, and there's a lot of like kind of cultural stuff happening there, we underestimate the importance of that and think it's all just about the infrastructure. And the infrastructure is super critical, but there was a lot of advocacy that was happening here in Toronto before we had any infrastructure at all. So I think it's all of those supports and that including the cultural supports are really important for building up demand.
Cool. Well, that's affirming. Thank you. We want to sort of wrap up our time with our vision question, and I kind of Louise touched on it a little bit earlier, but you've been a advocate and a researcher and thinking about the bikes for 25 years. If you could, you were given the keys to the city and make your changes that you wanted to see implemented. If you could describe that future for us, just to share with us what it looks like and who's there and who's involved, that'd be great.
So I guess I think every Canadian city and community, that our public spaces are safe and welcoming for everyone, no matter how you get around, no matter, if you're able or disabled, and if you're, the color of your skin, obviously, like that's like, I think all of these things are, just that's the kind of minimum that I'm hoping for. and that our communities are prioritizing walking and cycling, that we continue to take some of that space that we've allowed to be dominated by cars, and to make it better, have better uses. I think also in my kind of ideal world, like it's the transportation and housing are so linked, and the having affordable housing, having no homelessness. I think these are really just, it's not just about people moving around, but it's about people having safe places to live. And so I think that that's, we need to kind of be thinking about those together, certainly in the, I live in a very increasingly unaffordable city where people are being pushed to the margins. So it's the opposite of what I hope for my city and for the other cities in Canada.
Thank you for that. Yeah, certainly. Safe spaces both at home and while we're traveling are so important. So thanks for that. Thanks for your time today. It's been super helpful for us to learn, to hear your wisdom and share your experience. And I love the poster in the background. I'm going to work on my background next time. So I have some bike related gear in the back here. Yeah, but yeah, we so appreciate your time. One final question. I saw that you grew up in Southern Ontario. Where did you grow up?
In Oakville.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
The GTA has been home for a while, I guess.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Any final words, Luis?
If anyone wants to read a little bit about bikes and economics, it's almost the same title. Ours is Bikeconomics. This is Bikenomics, from Ellie Blue, and who knows, maybe she can be one of our next guests in a future episode. I'd love to talk about Ellie, and like we touched on a lot of things: bikes and business, bikes and public space, and equity, transportation and housing. Great link there, Nancy. There's so much more that we could talk about, and how the cycling can have a positive impact in our economy. Like we could talk about the cost of public health, the cost of road maintenance, the traffic collisions that could be reduced if you have more people cycling, and just so many other things. And of course, we just have 30 to 40 minutes to talk about this here, but I'm hopeful, and thank you so much for all your insights, Nancy. I'm hopeful we can further this conversation, and we can have more people thinking about it and talking about it and being obsessed about it, like you are, Nancy, about bikes in our cities. Thank you so much.
Oh, we lost her, I guess. Well, yeah. That was another good show, Luis. Thanks so much for your help. And yeah, next week's episode will be about education, biking to school. So look forward to that next Wednesday, June the 10th. And we're going to have some guests from London at the school board and at the Active and Safe Routes to School join us. So look forward to that. And thanks for watching, everybody.
Happy World Bicycle Day.